Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something pretty interesting today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at this devotional text. It's all about like Christian marriage advice,
Okay.
but it's written for men.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's from that kind of like evangelical perspective.
Right.
But I think there's some stuff in here that we can pull out that would be useful no matter like what your background is.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
It's always fascinating to look at these kind of specific lenses on marriage,
Yeah.
like how different traditions and like belief systems kind of tackle the same age-old problems.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it helps us understand not just the advice, but also the context,
Right.
where it's coming from.
Okay, so first thing that jumps out at me in this text
Yeah.
is the idea of husbands as the head of the household.
Oh.
Now, I know that word, it can be a little bit loaded.
Yeah, I can see how some people might bristle at that.
Definitely. So before we get too far, let's unpack what they actually mean by it.
Well, the text actually starts with this funny story. There's this guy who goes to like a masculinity training thing,
Oh, no.
and he comes home all puffed up, declaring himself the head.
Oh, gosh.
It's hilarious. You can imagine how well that goes over with his wife.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Yeah, that's a lighthearted way to show that they're not talking about like some kind of tyrannical rule.
Right. More of a cautionary tale.
Exactly.
So then they get into a more nuanced definition. So it's
Yeah.
not about domineering control. It's more like being a coordinator
Hmm.
or, captain of the ship, kind of like setting the tone.
Right. But it goes deeper than that. They tie it to this idea of covering authority for the wife.
Okay.
And this is where the theological roots kind of come in,
Gotcha.
which not everyone will agree with.
Yeah, of course.
But essentially, they're talking about the husband taking on this spiritual responsibility
Right.
to create a safe space for his wife to thrive. You know what I mean?
I see.
But what's interesting is this idea of covering can also be understood outside of like a strictly religious context.
In what way?
It's about providing emotional support and protection,
Right.
being there for your partner.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it kind of broadens the scope a bit.
I like that. It makes you think about the different layers of responsibility in any relationship,
Exactly.
regardless of beliefs.
Absolutely.
Okay, so speaking of responsibility, there's this statistic the text throws in.
Okay.
It's from the French National Institute of Demographic Studies.
Wow. They did their research.
Right.
Wow.
Okay, so it says that men are dying 5.9 years earlier than women,
Wow.
on average, as of last year.
That's a big difference.
It's huge. And the source connects this to the idea of men carrying these burdens,
Okay.
making sacrifices for their families.
Mhm.
They even go so far as to compare it to, like, Christ's sacrifice.
Wow. Okay. I see the parallel they're drawing there.
Yeah.
It's definitely a strong statement.
Yeah. It's almost like they're saying the shorter lifespan is a result of
Right.
men inherently taking on more
Yeah, more risk.
responsibility.
More burdens, yeah.
But we know that lifespan is influenced by so many things, right?
Absolutely. Genetics, lifestyle choices, healthcare access, all sorts of factors.
Exactly.
So while the text focuses on this sacrifice angle,
Mm-hmm.
it's crucial to consider all those other pieces of the puzzle.
Right. And it makes you think about all the pressures and expectations society puts on men.
For sure. And how those might contribute to that lifespan gap.
Which leads us perfectly into another big theme from the text.
Okay, what's that?
Spiritual guidance. It's pretty straightforward about husbands being the spiritual leaders at home.
Interesting. They give examples of what that looks like.
Yeah, there's this anecdote about wives always being late for church because they're busy getting the family ready.
Oh, yeah. Classic Sunday morning scramble.
Right. And the text uses this to say the husband should be more proactive,
Mm-hmm.
in helping so things run smoothly.
Okay, so he's taking charge on the spiritual side of things.
Exactly. They even suggest he lead family prayer time
Okay.
or organize, like, spiritual retreats.
Wow, it's very hands-on.
Right. It's interesting.
It is. But how do you think this advice works for couples who don't necessarily share the same faith?
That's a great question. And even for those who aren't religious at all,
Right.
like, is there a broader principle we can take away?
Yeah, because this specific advice might not apply directly,
Mm-hmm.
but there's definitely a core idea here about shared values,
Right.
shared beliefs being important in a relationship.
Whether it's faith or ethics or even just shared hobbies.
Exactly. Having that common ground can
Well.
really strengthen the connection
Right. It gives you something to build on.
and a shared sense of purpose as a couple.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about headship,
Right.
sacrifice, and now spiritual leadership.
Big topics.
It seems like they're really pushing men to step up in all these areas. But it's not all about like grand gestures or taking charge.
Okay, what else do they emphasize?
Communication,
Oh, interesting.
specifically the power of words.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Communication is key in any relationship.
Exactly. And the text actually goes as far as to say that to truly love a woman,
Yeah?
you need to understand how to speak to her heart.
Oh, wow.
Like words can have such a deep impact on her emotions.
That's a powerful statement.
And what's fascinating is how they contrast men and women's responses
Okay.
to physical touch versus verbal affirmation.
So how do they see that playing out?
They say that women are generally more affected by words, while men are more responsive to physical touch.
Interesting. It's
Yeah.
definitely a generalization.
Right, and of course there will be exceptions.
Yeah. And it doesn't account for individual preferences.
Of course.
But I think the point they're trying to make is that there can be differences in how we express and receive love.
Yeah.
And it's not about one being better than the other. It's about understanding those nuances
Right.
and learning how to communicate effectively within that context.
It's like learning each other's love language.
Exactly. Figuring out what makes your partner feel loved and appreciated.
Yeah. And the text acknowledges that not all men are naturally good with words.
Okay.
So they encourage husbands to actually seek help if they struggle with expressing themselves verbally.
That's good advice.
Right. It could be counseling or a workshop or even just talking to a trusted friend
Yeah.
just to get some guidance.
It's about recognizing that we all have areas where we can improve. And sometimes we need a little help along the way.
And it normalizes the idea that it's okay to ask for help.
Absolutely. It's a sign of strength, not weakness, to acknowledge that you need support.
I like that. Okay, so we've covered a lot. Headship, sacrifice, spiritual leadership,
And communication.
the power of words. This devotional text is really packing a punch, but there's one more section I'm really curious to explore.
Okay, what's that?
The key prayers section. It's like a direct line to seeking guidance for becoming a better husband according to their framework.
Intriguing. So they provide specific prayers for husbands to use.
Yeah. It feels like a really personal and intentional way to approach self-improvement.
I'm interested to see what those prayers reveal about the text's overall message.
Me too. But before we dive into that, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll explore this section and see what other wisdom we can uncover.
You know, I'm really struck by how much this text emphasizes personal reflection. It's like they're saying, okay, here's all this advice, but you also need to take the time to really look inward.
Yeah, like it's not enough to just go through the motions.
Exactly. You got to be intentional about applying these principles to your own life and figure out what works for you and your partner.
And that brings us to this really interesting key prayers section.
Yeah, this part is fascinating.
It's like a direct line to seeking guidance for becoming a better husband, according to this framework.
I'm curious to see how these prayers kind of echo the themes we've been talking about. Like, do they reinforce the ideas of sacrifice and leadership?
Yeah, let's take a look. Okay, so this first one is a prayer for humility and guidance.
Okay.
It asks for strength and wisdom to lead the family, but in a way that's like humble and grace-filled.
It's interesting how they connect humility with leadership. It's like they're saying true strength comes from recognizing your own limitations and seeking guidance from something greater than yourself.
Yeah, and even if you're not coming at it from a religious angle, I think that idea of seeking guidance and support resonates.
Absolutely. Whether it's through prayer, meditation, therapy, or even just confiding in a trusted friend or mentor, it's about acknowledging that we don't have all the answers.
And that it's okay to ask for help. Okay, here's another one that caught my eye. It's a prayer for understanding your wife's needs.
Okay. This should be good.
It talks about the importance of empathy, like really trying to see things from her perspective. And it even asks for guidance in communicating effectively.
So it's not just about figuring out her needs, but also learning how to express your love and appreciation in a way that she understands and receives.
Yeah, and it ties back to that idea of love languages.
Right, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Because even if you're doing all the right things, if you're not speaking your partner's love language, they might not feel fully loved or appreciated.
It's like you're missing that connection.
Exactly. So these prayers, even though they're rooted in a specific faith tradition, I think they offer some valuable insights for anyone in a relationship.
Yeah, it's about being intentional, being humble, and always striving to grow and understand each other better.
Beautifully said.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and look at another anecdote from the text. This one is about a husband and wife who are getting ready for church.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one. It's the one where the wife is running late, right?
And the husband is getting impatient?
Yeah, it's Sunday morning and everyone's stressed.
Exactly. But instead of getting frustrated or leaving her behind, the text encourages the husband to take a step back.
Okay. What do they suggest he do?
They say he should help her get ready, offer support, even if it means they're a little late.
It's a small gesture, but it speaks volumes about their partnership.
Right. It's about putting her needs before his own in that moment.
And recognizing that they're a team.
Yeah, and I think it challenges that traditional view of leadership as being all about authority and control.
Right. It's a more nuanced perspective.
Yeah.
Where leadership also involves service and empathy.
And it goes back to that concept of covering that we discussed earlier. It's about creating a safe and supportive environment for your partner.
Where she feels loved and respected, even when things are chaotic.
Now, this text obviously comes from a very specific religious perspective, but do you think there are takeaways here that apply to relationships in general?
Oh, absolutely. I think the principles of service, empathy, and understanding are universal. They transcend any particular belief system.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that healthy relationships are built on those foundational values, whether you're religious or not.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're all human beings with needs and desires, and treating each other with kindness and respect.
So even though the text frames these ideas within a Christian context, I think there's a lot of wisdom here that can be applied to any relationship.
Definitely. Because ultimately we're all striving for connection, love, and a sense of belonging.
And that requires effort, understanding, and a willingness to prioritize our partner's well-being.
Well said. So while we've been focusing on this devotional text, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are many different paths to building healthy and fulfilling relationships. And what works for one couple might not work for another.
Exactly. The key is to find what resonates with you and your partner, and to always be open to learning and growing together.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth revisiting something we touched on earlier, about how this text encourages us to be more self-aware.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that right at the beginning, about looking inward.
Right. It's not just about following the advice blindly. It's about taking the time to reflect on what it means for you.
Okay, so it's like personalize it to your own situation.
Exactly. And I think that's where the real value lies. It's in that process of self-discovery and growth.
And you know, that's something that came up again and again throughout this text, this emphasis on personal growth.
Oh, for sure. They really hammer home the idea that we all have areas where we can improve.
Yeah, like it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And it requires effort and intentionality.
So what would you say are some of the key takeaways for listeners who are trying to apply this to their own relationships?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is the importance of communication.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that.
Right. And it's not just about talking more. It's about communicating effectively.
So like really listening to your partner.
Yes. Active listening is crucial.
Understanding their perspective.
Exactly. And learning how to express yourself in a way that they understand and receive.
Okay, that's like tailored communication.
Exactly. It's about being mindful and intentional with your words.
And that takes effort.
It does. But it's so worth it. Because when you can communicate effectively with your partner, it strengthens the bond.
It builds trust.
Right. And it creates a foundation for a healthy and fulfilling relationship.
And you know, the text also emphasizes the importance of forgiveness.
Oh, absolutely. That's a big one.
They talk about how inevitable it is to make mistakes in a relationship.
Especially in a marriage. You're spending so much time together. You're bound to step on each other's toes sometimes.
Right. And they're saying that holding on to anger and resentment only hurts you in the long run.
It poisons the relationship.
So forgiveness is key.
It is. It's about letting go of those hurts and choosing to move forward.
And that's not always easy.
No, it definitely takes work. But it's essential for healing and growth.
And I think that message of forgiveness is something that transcends any specific religion or belief system.
I agree. It's a universal truth. We all make mistakes. We all hurt each other sometimes.
Yeah.
And learning to forgive is crucial for any relationship to thrive.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
Take some time to reflect on what we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how these concepts apply to your own life and relationships.
Whether it's with a romantic partner, a friend, or a family member.
And remember that building strong and healthy relationships takes effort, intentionality, and a willingness to grow.
And don't be afraid to ask for help and support along the way.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.